In this video, we'll talk about the speaking test of the Cambridge Proficiency exam. But before we do that, let's just quickly take a look at what exactly is required at a C2 level. Somebody at this level can understand pretty much everything they can hear and read. They can also process and summarize information from different sources, whether it's spoken or written, and they can reconstruct arguments and present this in a very coherent way. They can express themselves spontaneously, extremely fluently and precisely. And this sounds like a native speaker, and that's exactly what this level is. And then the final description is that they can identify different shades of meaning, even in more complex situations. And this all comes from the Council of Europe framework reference, CEF4, that you can see here on screen. And it describes things that you should be capable of doing at a C2 level. Let's now move to the speaking test itself. As with all the other Cambridge exams, it starts with some questions. And the questions again are quite straightforward and simple. The examiner will ask basic information about your name and where you live. The examiner may also ask you about working and studying, for example. And then there's a range of sample questions, which again, like the other Cambridge exams, are addressed to each person individually. So here are some quick examples of what you might find in part one. And you can see with the question that there's enough information in there for you to discuss your answer. And here we have three examples of the type of questions that you might encounter in the speaking part one. And of course, this part, like the other exams, is 2 minutes long. And here's an example of an answer. The key point about answers at a C2 level is that you need to produce more than a very simple answer. And generally speaking, it's a good setup for the rest of the exam, where it prepares you for responses to other more complex types of questions. And here is a sample question. And the question in this case was how good you are at organizing your time. You can see here with this answer that the person demonstrates the skill of a native speaker, like the first sentence, for example, where we don't include pronouns and some verbs. And then the speaker manages to discuss two other points and give some semi-detailed information about it. Let's move on now to part two. Now, if we take a look at what you can find in part two, and part two is a set of pictures around a particular theme. It's 4 minutes long, and we have 4 examples here, but it could be up to 6. So there's no way to predict this. And it is broken into 2 tasks. The first task requires you to compare 2 pictures together. And the second task asks you then to expand on that and discuss all of the pictures together. So here are the instructions from the examiner. The instructions are very generic. They just point out that these are people in different situations. And for your first task, you do need to compare 2 pictures. In this case, it's A and D, but it could be any combination of these pictures. And there's a second question that goes with this. And for this particular exercise, you talk for about a minute, so it's pretty short. Once you completed that part, you move on to the second task, and more than likely the examiner will interrupt you and point out that you need to consider all of the pictures. And this is a bit more complex. And one thing that is important here is you do need to listen carefully to the instructions, and here's a set of instructions. The task in this case is a television documentary that will discuss working in the food industry, and these pictures represent aspects of the food industry. And the instructions for you are to discuss the issues that these pictures represent here. And then to complete your task, you need to make a decision of some kind. In this case, it's nominating one of the options that you've just been talking about. And this, of course, is 3 minutes long. So how can you approach the part 2 exercise? Well, it's 4 minutes long. And the first task, you need to try to share the time. It is only 1 minute long, so it's incredibly short, and sometimes you can find you're talking over your partner. The other thing it asks you to do is and the second question that comes with this particular task is usually some type of speculation, and you need to suggest answers or propose particular things that you might relate to these pictures. In your second task, you need to talk to your partner, exchange ideas with your partner. You also need to demonstrate that you can produce these extended opinions. At the same time, you need to make sure that you are listening to your partner and that neither of you is attempting to talk over the other. Part 2 then moves into part 3, and again part 3 is broken into 3 sections. So we're going to look at the first part of this. And this, you have 1 to 2 minutes for this, and this is where they present you with a card, and on the card you can see there's a card. It has a question, whether it's preferable to make your own decisions or to consult others for advice. And there's information on the card that you may or may not use, and it's entirely up to you. You don't actually have to use what's on the card, but 95% of students opt for what's on the card because there's a certain comfort in it, in the sense that it's there in front of you. You don't have to think too hard about other ideas, and you can use this piece of information. The only thing I would say about the timing here is that it does say 1 to 2 minutes. You should keep talking until such time as the examiner tells you to stop. Ideally, you will be able to talk for a full 2 minutes. The second task related to this is another question. And this particular part is about a minute or so. And here are some sample instructions for this. And what happens in this case is the second candidate is invited to answer the question. And once the second candidate has offered their opinion, the examiner will bring it back to the first candidate, and they need to offer their own opinions on this particular topic as well. And now it's the turn of the second candidate, and once again this is 1 to 2 minutes long, and you have a similar set of instructions, and here's the card again with the information on it, and once again the option is there to use or not use as you prefer. And once this part is finished, there is another question which is again about a minute long, and this time the first candidate is asked the question and the second candidate is encouraged to respond to what the partner has said. Now let's move on to the final task, which is ending the test. The third task in this is ending the test. The length of time you have for this particular task depends really on how much time has been spent on the previous 2 tasks. And again, these are the instructions from the examiner. And the examiner will state that to complete the test, that they are going to discuss a particular topic. The example we had in part 3, one of the examples we had was about decisions. So these are going to be very generalized questions. And again, this is a discussion exercise. And the examiner can invite candidate 2 to talk first, followed by candidate 1, or it may be a case that both of you will talk together. So you'll find a series of questions like this to bring you up to the end of the test. Part 3 is a challenging task, especially the first task, but the simplest way to approach it and to consider it is that it is a presentation, and the methodology and the approaches you might use for a presentation apply equally to this first task. But most important of all, you need to demonstrate that you have the ability to develop and structure whatever topic you're discussing, and to kind of interweave them together, to interlink all the different ideas together. And obviously to speak as long as possible and try to get up close to 2 minutes. And the second task is, again, it's a response, so you need to respond appropriately, and like other parts of the test, give extended opinions and justify them, and also be ready to respond to whatever your partner has said. And then the final part of this is the discussion. And in this case, you're responding to the examiner, and you need to continue to justify your opinions and also respond appropriately to whatever your partner has said.